Hi, my name is Taylor Wickmanowski, and in this video I want to talk about how I teach a PowerPoint. If you just use a PowerPoint, put it on the screen and that's the end of it, well, it's really no better than a textbook. It's really important to use it as a resource and something you use to supplement your own instruction. So what I'm going to do in this short video here, I'm going to look at the PowerPoint presentation for this lesson and explain how I differentiate the instruction and kind of augment what's going on the screen. So this is the first PowerPoint presentation. What is environmental science? Okay, and then in this first slide, it's just the definition of environmental science. So when I present this, I will read this. Okay, so I would say, environmental science is the study of natural systems and how humans both affect and are affected by those systems. Now, to leave that as it is and to leave that alone, some kids can take that and run with it, but a lot of kids need some supplemental checks for understanding. So one thing I would look for, just first off of that, is the vocabulary word, and that vocabulary word, systems. Okay, that's important. Students need to know that what that means. Otherwise, they're kind of lost in the definition. So I'd ask kids what a system is, and the definition I'd be looking for would be something that's got multiple parts that work together to achieve some outcome or function. So they can understand that nature is, there are natural systems or the different things interacting. This picture, though, I think that, it's great when you can, and that is one of the main advantages of PowerPoints. You've got a great image there. So I would ask the students, okay, so what is this guy doing? How do we know he's an environmental scientist? And there I would really be looking for students to use the definition as it's presented here and integrate that into their understanding. So, for example, they might talk about the fact that he's maybe studying natural systems because he's looking there and there's plants, there's water. He could be looking at what plant life is there. Maybe he's looking at a fish or something in the mud. Maybe he's looking for a mineral or some sort of non-living thing that's going to be affecting the organisms there. So that's the natural systems they see. But then I would press, beyond environmental science is not just studying natural systems, but also how humans affect those systems. So what from this picture could we be getting to show that he is an environmental scientist rather than, say, just a biologist? And in this case, I would ask students maybe to look back here and note that we've got some construction here, and this is not just a natural feature, right? This is a human-made feature, so the whole course of the river may have been changed by humans. But also, a lot of times students will mention things like, hey, that water is bubbly, it's kind of nasty, he's wearing gloves, maybe that's polluted. When you really solicit those kinds of understandings and those kinds of explanations from the students, it can really enhance what's happening. So that's how I would look at just a single slide and break it down. And looking at what's the vocabulary presented on the slide, and then really solicit some understanding from the students. Going to the next slide, again, the environment, just giving a definition. This consists of all the living and non-living things that interact with organisms. So I would ask students, okay, first off, in this picture, what do we see that's an organism? Most students are going to go to the obvious largest organism, and that's going to be the tree. I'd press them further, say, okay, what other types of organisms do we see? Then other students are going to say, well, we see grasses, we see other plants. I could then press them, all right, what don't we see that's probably there organism-wise? And they might say, well, there could be birds in the trees, there could be worms in the soil, there could be bugs crawling up the bark of the tree. So I want to get them to, get that sense of the organisms that are there. Some students maybe really observe it and point out that there's a path here. So maybe that this path means that humans use this. That people might mention that there's seems to be a city or a human settlement in the distance. So they could talk about how humans are some of the organisms interacting here at this environment. Then I'd ask them, okay, what else in this picture would be examples of non-living things that are interacting with the organisms, and then we probably hear things like the soil, water and minerals in the soil, the air, the clouds, the sun, and get a sense that there is both living and non-living things, and try to bring home that explanation of the environment. Ecology, then I move on to this slide and talk about how Ecology is an important part of environmental science. It's a study of interactions between organisms and their environment. Ask the students, what are these guys looking at? What are they doing? And they may point out that these look like mushrooms, a type of fungus, and then I may check for prior understanding because in the next presentation, the next lesson is about the next presentation is about the different niches and different roles organisms play. So they may already know that a fungus is a decomposer, so it's interacting in that ecosystem. Finally, coming up to another real, perhaps a word they may be familiar with, but maybe not entirely familiar. What's interdisciplinary mean? And again, I would have to break down the vocabulary. So because environmental science also deals with humans, the most anatomically and behaviorally complex animal in Earth's history. So first off, what does anatomically mean? Hopefully students would be able to offer that has something to do with anatomy and the parts. And what does it mean to say that we are complex, anatomically complex? So they're kind of solicit understanding from students that it's not our organs necessarily. It's not that we have the most complex stomach or the most complex limbs, but it's really that our brain is anatomically complex. And then that has allowed us to have such complex behavior. So I may solicit examples from students. What is complex about our behavior compared to other animals? And then maybe perhaps they could talk about culture, technology, things, language, art, all these things that make us complex. So that brings us to, what does interdisciplinary mean? And so interdisciplinary, we could talk about, not discipline in the sense of, hey, you're in trouble because you broke the rules, but discipline as an academic discipline, like a school subject. So I might ask them for examples of different school subjects. There's math, there's social studies, there's history, there's geography, there's biology and chemistry. So get a sense of that. And once we have like a sense of what those different things are, we go to this next slide. And this is my example, eutrophication. And again, might ask students to say, well, this may involve biology here because we see some algae interacting with the land and the water. We could talk about this being agriculture, and maybe there's some chemistry involved in these chemicals being sprayed. And then this map showing the Mississippi watershed, that may have to do with geography. So kind of like my final strategy when I'm doing these PowerPoints, in addition to doing all this where we're looking and breaking down both the content, the specific content vocabulary, and some of that academic vocabulary that a lot of times, a textbook is going to take for granted that students understand kind of the general academic vocabulary, like phenomenon. Working with the EL students, giving them that opportunity to acquire that vocabulary and become comfortable with it, make sure that that's not impeding their understanding of the content. Okay, but so beyond that, that approach, what this also allows me to do in this case, I would say, okay, now that we've seen my example, we understand how this phenomenon is interdisciplinary. I'd ask the kids, what is one environmental problem, and how might that be interdisciplinary? So I think I would do, in this case, once I've posed that question, which is really a critical thinking question, it's really asking students to integrate what they've learned already. They've learned a lot of vocabulary already about ecology, the environment, environmental science, and what it means to be interdisciplinary. And then talk about a problem, an environmental problem, and why that's interdisciplinary. So again, with the PowerPoint still up here with the idea of what is interdisciplinary, right? Using multiple subjects. Okay, with that idea still up there, I would go around to different groups. I would talk to those groups, just kind of listen in on the conversations and interact with them. And then by doing that, I'd kind of understand which groups are kind of on the mark, who've got good answers to share, things to say about this. And so, for example, if somebody was going to talk about global warming, okay, they could mention that it involves chemistry, right? There's carbon dioxide in the makeup of the atmosphere. That could be a meteorology subject with talking about the weather and the climate, geology, just how weather works, how the atmosphere works, physics, right? global warming is somehow related to fuel, right, and their need for energy. That also relates to economics and history. What's the history of using these types of fuels? Why are those fuels used? How have they, how do economics drive our use of these fuels versus, say, another cleaner energy source? And then finally, politics, right? They could talk about that. It's a huge part of the global warming issue. The question really, if we want to do something, can we even do it, right? Can we politically achieve these goals, even if we scientifically and socially understand it? So again, a PowerPoint is not something that you just put up on the screen and then let the kids read off and then write on that note sheet. Really, that note sheet I use allow those kids to annotate the things that they're writing on there, and we're using PowerPoint is kind of a living text. It's there on the screen, but it's really up to me to supplement it with anecdotes, with checks for understanding, with critical thinking questions, and then allow the students to interact with it as well. And that's how it becomes in the way I teach it a more effective strategy.